All right, I believe I'm live. I gotta close some of these programs down on my computer. 1 second. How's it going, everyone? We've got the gang back again. Harmiter's in here. Red Octane's in here. Soju Moju's back again. Hopefully you guys are doing well. So it looks like, yeah, we got a fair amount of beats. I should be able to get through them myself today. So this challenge, use one of the percussion loops or drum loops from the Beat Batter kit. You can only use a maximum of 8 layers. This is one of the ones that people routinely find challenging just because really constricting the amount of sounds that you can use in your beat really makes things difficult. Just like you said, Corey, for the transitions especially. And Mike is sounding good. Excellent. Swift Dreamer, how's it going? BPM must be 60 or 120. That also makes it tough because it's going to be very slow paced. And so you're going to need typically a lot of sounds to fill up space in the beat. If it's that slow of a BPM, my thinking was hopefully one of those percussion loops could have helped you. That would be just one layer and open things up for you. But nonetheless, we'll take a listen to what you guys came up with. I've got a few hats here. Maybe I'll put this hat on. Or maybe I'll put this little crown on that I used during a video this week. Let me know if this looks good, and I'll keep it on. So let's do the audio test here and make sure that's sounding good. So let me know if that sounds good, and we'll have at it, guys. Hope you're having a good Sunday. I plan on going to the gym right after this. I need to do some cardio because I ate cookies last night. I was being a bad boy. I'm looking fresh. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, let me know if the audio's good. And we'll hit the ground running today. The Biggie Smalls crown. This was from a party store for $10. And that's pretty much why I bought it. For a stupid video that I made last week. That should be coming out. Audio sounds good? All right. Let's jump right into it with whose beat should we start with first? You know what, Swift Dreamer? Let's start with your beat here. That abruptly ended. Swift Dreamer. Let me quickly write down my last thought here. All right. So like we usually do, please let me know what you're thinking or what you guys hear in the chat, and feel free to throw in with your feedback. It definitely does help me. What kind of cookies? They were oat pecan cookies that my girlfriend made. I have no idea what was in them. She just asked me if I wanted cookies, and I said absolutely. Red Octane says drums are a little lacking, main snare I guess. Maybe some saturation and compression could help bring it out. Love the vibes and bass line. Gracious Jin, I like the bass line. So yeah, Harmiter, I got 80 BPM in 4/4. Swift Dreamer, you said the beat is in 3/4. Let me take a listen again quickly. Yeah, I think Harmiter's right there. That's just a regular 4/4 beat in 80 BPM. I think maybe that last bar there where you just had kicks and you didn't remove snares, maybe that was what's throwing you off there. But yeah, I think that was just a regular 4/4 beat at 80 BPM. So yeah, Sharp Vision says, sounds like it needs some depth. So yeah, I think this is somewhat my takeaway too. I really like that main sound, that this chord progression that you built. I think that the that sound could have been made larger, and to the point that Sharp mentioned, just using that to create some depth as well. Maybe adding some reverb would have been nice. So it's like two birds, one stone, making that a little bit more of a central part of the beat, as well as just taking up more depth in the beat, just to make it sound a little bit more complete. The drum pattern, as Red Octane mentioned, he mentioned it was a little bit lacking. I thought it was okay. The drum pattern to me was fine. I think the thing that sort of jumped out to me was that main synth lead. It was very, very bright and very, very obviously synthy sounding, but it seemed like it was the only sound really up in that space. It sounded like the drums were like very processed and had a little bit of the sort of grittier feel to them, which is completely fine. Then you had your chord sound that was in the lower space, and everything else was sort of tilted towards the lower frequencies, and then you just had that synth lead sitting all on its own all the way up in the higher frequencies, and it really sort of stood out, but sort of not in a good way. It didn't really integrate with the rest of the beat. So for me, what I would have done is maybe just shaved off a little bit of the higher frequencies, boosted up some of the lower frequencies of that synth lead, just so there isn't as huge of a gap between all of your other sounds plus the synth lead all the way on the higher frequencies. It sort of becomes closer to where the other sounds are. You get a little bit of overlap, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but that's how you get your sounds to sort of integrate into the beat a little bit more, just because that sound really felt like it stood out completely apart from the beat. And overall, though, I really did like the bass line. I really did like the idea. It felt like a cool, laid back type of beat, and just like Gracious Jin mentioned, he liked the bass line as well. And Red Octane, that was a really cool bass line. It was really well programmed. So yeah, you had a bunch of good ideas in here. Just pushing certain sounds into different spaces and maybe playing with how central certain sounds are. I think that would have just helped this beat push it over the edge just a little bit more. So definitely a well-produced idea here. Definitely understood what you're going for. Yeah, just think about what's your POI? What are you trying to make this central sound in this beat? And focus on making that sound take up a little bit more space. And to the point that Sharp Vision mentioned, having some sound in here, add a little bit more depth. Obviously, that's one of the challenges with this challenge, which is you're not given like a ton of material that you can use to fill up all the spaces in your beat. So you had to be very thoughtful and very sort of creative with what you do, what effects you add, just so all your sounds take up a little bit more room than maybe they would typically. And my hope is that you sort of figure out that you don't necessarily need tons and tons and tons of sound to make a full, complete sounding beat. You can do it with just a handful of sounds. So So yeah, I think just adding a few effects, pushing some of your sounds around would have definitely got you there. Sharp Vision, let's see what you got for us. That was Kaiser Soze, Sharp Vision in the Flesh. How's it going, Olivia? We got Pseudo in here as well, and Jose. Good to see you all. So yeah, that's a really cool beat. Let's see what you guys are saying about this one. Love the perks. Open hi-hats perfect. Nice feel to this one. Says Harmiter. Sound selection's nice. Like that eerie high-end pad thing coming in and out. Fills up nicely without becoming fatiguing. That's a great point. Swift Dreamer says, I like the idea. I think the idea is good, but kind of suffers from 8 to 16 bar loop syndrome a bit. Interesting. Nice guitar feels, another dope bass line. Would have liked to hear different bass riffs throughout. Oh, okay. Or one more just to juxtapose the main one. It goes on for a while, but it's a good rhythm. So yeah, I think a really awesome job building this one, Sharp. I think this was obviously at the right BPM, and you did a very smart thing of using, I'm not sure whether you used just one or maybe it was multiple loops, but the sort of density of the actual drum loop plus the percussion, the percussive layers in the beat just did a great job of filling up a lot of space in the beat. I actually think this is a good example of what I was thinking for next challenges, for the next challenge coming up. A beat that is high in rhythm, low in musicality. And that's exactly what we have here, where he just did such a smart job of filling up a lot of space with a lot of the rhythmic elements, and he didn't have to go overboard with how musical the beat was. The bass line was awesome, but you know, when you listen to it, it wasn't overly complex, it wasn't overly melodic. The additional textures that came in and out throughout the beat, it's not like they were hugely complex patterns. It was just a lot of smart decisions that made this beat sound so complete without having to go over the board or over the top with creating these highly melodic musical patterns. And another reason why that worked was because he had a lot of sounds just coming in and out, so it wasn't just the same sound playing over and over again. He had the sort of guitar lick at the beginning, then he had like it sounded like a somewhat of a separate guitar here and there, and then for the hook section he had these sort of swelling pads in the back, so he just did a great job of structuring in that way. It goes on for a while, but it's a good rhythm. First time watching me live. Oh, it's good to have you. Hopefully you submit some of your music as well. You can join in the fun and you know, have your beats reviewed, which is something that's really, really helpful for a lot of the people who say who show up very often. I actually sampled the bass line, struggled with variation because of the layer limit. I'm actually going to add some more variation for the release outside of the challenge. The neck, homie neck, just a couple of beats that you missed so far. So I think with the bass, with the variation and the sort of layer limit, I think if that's something that you felt you struggled with, even just doing something as simple as like taking the drum loop that you have built already and just sort of cutting it up so you have certain drops here and there, and then just, you know, playing some alternate pattern briefly for your bass line, just to create variation. You don't necessarily have to like introduce all these new sounds. Just like I mentioned in the course, just taking the sounds that you have and creating, you know, different rhythmic pattern, or just taking the melodic notes that you have and just creating something small, some small little switch up that only lasts for like 1 or 2 bars even every so often. That can routinely be enough to keep your listener engaged and interested. So don't necessarily feel like you have to like cram in more textures, make the beat sound huge all the time. Something that I've said routinely is like, people underestimate how powerful it is to just drop the energy of your beat sometimes with just reducing layers and just taking what you already have and just reconfiguring them a tiny bit. That can often be enough to make the beat varied to the point where it just stays interesting. You don't get that sort of loop syndrome that you guys are mentioning. And to what Swift Dreamer also mentioned, the crash was a bit overpowered, I will say, but overall, like, I love the unique textures throughout the beat. The sampled bass line sounded awesome. Very cool collage approach with the beat. That's something that I always sort of love to do with my own beats at times, of just creating this very consistent, dense drum loop, and then just having these sounds come in and out, as opposed to just like one sound constantly throughout the beat. So overall, just awesome job here. I think this is very impressive, sharp, and very quality beat from you as usual. Was the bassline loop sampled? Maybe you could have made a one-shot sample. So yeah, that would have been a good idea if the bassline was sampled. Yeah, I would have liked different notes and not new sounds, as I felt all the sounds there meshed well together. Yeah, so great point there to what I mentioned. You don't have to necessarily cram more sounds into your beat just to create that variation. I think what Sharp had here was definitely enough. It was just, just creating little alternations in the patterns could have been enough to make the beat sound complete. Let's jump into Harmiter's beat here, Dark Waters. All right. Dark Waters by Harmiter. Let's highlight you, Harmiter. Let's see what you guys are saying about this one. Has my body moving feel it's missing some high end though, says Octane, or maybe everything seems to sit in the background. That's an interesting, I didn't think of that. So I like the pad, chords, flute, and bass. I would have loved for the drums to pop more, says Swift Dreamer. Yeah, need some thumb, says Pseudo. Could see this in an old school James Bond-esque film. Lots of nice sounds that fit well, like how you played with silence at the end. Wish you did have something in the trunk though. Like the complexity of the arrangement, maybe add a kick and maybe EQ and soft clip the snare for it to pop more, says Swift Dreamer. So I think you guys are hearing a lot of the same things that I am. I really loved it. rhythms in this beat. I think Harmiter is known for his great drum work and just the attention to detail there. Great effects on all the sounds as well. Didn't really feel like I heard anything that was like stock sounding or like just very straightforward. I think there's a lot of meticulous detail put onto the sounds themselves. And with Harmiter in general, I really like what you're doing with your arrangements nowadays. I think we talked about this before, where sometimes it felt like your beats were a sort of mishmash of a few different ideas, and they would just jump from one idea to another. I think you're doing a great job of creating consistency throughout your idea. So everything feels like it's one cohesive idea, but you're doing a great job of just playing around within that idea to sort of create variation up and down and create different moods within that one idea, as opposed to it being a bunch of stitched together ideas that don't fit together. So I think you're doing a great job on that front. To the point, Harmiter says, I couldn't get the kicks to pop out because it was the loop. I did shave off some of the high end to make it darker. So to the point that everyone was mentioning, I think the thing was with this beat was that there was a bit of a lack of like presence in terms of the drums. What Core A mentioned was a very interesting, where it felt like everything was sort of in the background, even the drums, just because they didn't have much high-end presence. Didn't really feel like they had a more forward, very sort of present feel to them. And so to your point, you couldn't get the kicks to pop out because it was the loop. So that probably was the struggle, where you had to sort of pick and choose between like, should I remove one of my core sounds just to add a layer underneath for the kick, just to actually get some emphasis out of the kick. And I think the snare also could have been something that you could have really bolstered and layered just to bring some more foreground presence into the beat, just so it actually has a little bit more presence overall. So yeah, it sounds like you sort of picked that out yourself. I think that was just the one thing that held the beat back, where just having something a little bit more in the foreground, which would probably be the drums in the situation, even just layering a kick and a snare could have helped the beat feel a lot more complete. Yeah, one of the difficulties of this challenge, where the limitations sometimes force you to like kill your babies and like really have to axe some of the ideas that you might have for like some of the smaller little textures, just to get the core ideas built, the sort of core pillars of the idea built, to get the beat to actually sound full and present enough. And I think there was just that little bit of lacking in the foreground. But overall, really cool idea. Just, you know, once you remove the limitations of this challenge and just literally just layer a snare and a kick in the beat, I think it would have really came together. So yeah, cool job. And I really like to see just the consistency of the ideas nowadays from Harmiter. Awesome to hear. Let's jump into Gigi the Fox. We've got this beat, 70s cop film.
Gigi, turn on the radio.
All right, that was a 70s cop film beat that we just heard there. That was Gigi's beat. So yeah, definitely the intent there was to make a 70s cop track, and definitely a success there. The groovy, says Swift Dreamer. I can't get enough of this one, says Pseudo. Love the ideas in this beat. This one has me grooving for sure. Yeah, definitely a cool groove here with this beat. Very funky, says Olivia. Fun idea. Great collage of sounds, says Pseudo. I was not expecting anyone to actually do a 120 BPM beat, but Gigi did it here. I think there's a great... I think this is a great idea in terms of the intent. Obviously, it has a very 70s funky style to it. The beat, it being at 120 BPM and the fast-paced drum break really helped the beat sound full. And at that point, all Gigi really added was like that sort of organ plus the horns on top. And I think that was... and the bass line, obviously, and I think that was just enough to make the beat actually come together and feel full. So yeah, just this is sort of what I want to get across, where like you don't necessarily need tons and tons of layers to make a full sounding beat. You just need to understand how to fill up space, and doing so with some of the percussion loops and the drum loops from the chorus. Hopefully it really showed you just how important it is to really play around with some of the smaller rhythmic layers in your beat just to really fill up space. With this beat in particular, great bass line work as well. I think the bass texture itself was perfect. The bass line was just really fun to listen to. Eric B is in here. How's it going? And so, yeah, I think awesome job. I think without the stipulations, one thing that could have helped, the sort of trumpet horn layer, something that I find really helpful is when I want to introduce some of those types of sounds that are meant to sound real and organic but come from stock, or not stock synths, but like just from regular plugins. I'm planning on putting a tutorial on with one of this idea, just layering multiple stacks of sounds on top of each other and just playing around with the preset, or just choosing a slightly different preset just so it feels like there's a full sounding band playing at times can really help. So, you know, it depends on the sound. I think this one still worked perfectly fine just because there are definitely sounds where just having a single trumpet player works, and I think this one is a good example of that. But just in case some of you guys struggle with this concept of like, how can I get my horns, my brass to actually sound like it fits naturally within my beat, oftentimes just taking the exact same sound and just playing around with the preset a tiny bit, changing the sort of texture or the tone itself and playing a very similar pattern can really help. So yeah, I plan on putting out a tutorial video where I show this exact idea. But overall, Gigi, great job here. You want to build this sort of fun, groovy synth or 70s cop theme type of beat, like a Starsky and Hutch type of thing, and I think you succeeded perfectly, and it fit the bill for what the challenge needed. So great job. Eric, I see you did not submit your beat here. Did you make one, or did you were you too busy? I got to get really precise, but also try things you never have and just wing it. True. That's how you explore new cool ideas. Let's see what Jose's got for us. All right, that was Jose's beat there. Let's see what you guys are saying. Eric says he did make a beat for this, but it wasn't all that great. Fair enough. A bit quiet. I had to crank my interface up a bit, says Red Octane. The beginning kind of reminded me of Metal Gear Solid. Kind of had a vibe, a spy vibe to it. It's interesting. That's actually what I thought too. The Metal Gear Solid 2 soundtrack. Good track for a stealth level video game, at least the intro, I should say. Interesting hi-hat echo, says Olivia. Thinking the same thing. Love the bounce of the drums on this one, nice and open for an artist, but doesn't seem lacking. 808 sounds clear and not muddy, says Olivia. So with this beat, I mean, tale of two different beats. The sort of intro was a very different idea from the actual full sounding beat once that came in. So I'll start with the actual beat itself. I think for the full beat, all the sounds that were chosen here sat in the right spaces. The frequency spaces that they took up were great. I think there's a good amount of depth with the beat in terms of that sort of pad that sat in the back and that moving synth, the sort of pluckier synth more in the foreground. I think overall, just the big thing, just like Red Octane mentioned, was that the levels of the sounds themselves could have just been upped a little bit, especially the 808, as well as either the pad or the sort of plucky synth. Just raising up the volume a little bit could have made the beat sound a lot more full. So I'm curious whether, Jose, you we're a little bit worried about making things a little bit too loud, but I definitely do think there was room in this beat for things to sound a little bit louder. So one of the things that I talked about in the course was how helpful it can be to just take an acapella from YouTube and just add that onto your beat, just so you can get a good sense of like how loud certain things should be, or maybe if there are certain sounds that aren't really cutting through. I think if you did that same technique with this beat, you probably would have heard that, your drums were probably at a good level, but some of the musical instruments and maybe the 808 could have just been upped more in terms of the volume. So I think that's something that you can try out. Just grab an acapella and just play around with it. So you mentioned, yes, I need to work on volumes. I think you're doing a great job, though, of actually choosing the right sounds that fill out the right spaces. I remember this from the last submission that you had. You do a good job of choosing. You have good sound selection. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges that a lot of people have. And it sounds like you have that down. Playing around with the volumes and leveling, that's going to be a little bit more easy. So I think you're at a good place right now. So don't feel like it's a huge problem by all means, because the really hard part of choosing the right sounds, you're doing really well. So yeah, I'd really recommend just grabbing vocals and letting that help you decide how loud certain sounds should be, and just playing your beat with the vocals and maybe comparing it to the original song that you got the vocals from, just so you can sort of get a good sense of how loud the bass is, or how loud the synths are, and how loud the drums are. So I think that would really help you out here. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I think that's going to be really helpful for you to sort of try to do with your beats. Let's see what Corbin has for us. Core A Beats, Red Octane. All right. A quick question. Is it Core A or Cora beats? I've been calling you Core A this whole time. But I just realized I might be a complete idiot and have been mispronouncing your beat name, so I apologize for that. Yeah, so Swift Dreamer, I think you did a good job, Jose. Boom, 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 says Pseudo. This is dope. I like the bells. Nice sound selection, says Sharp Media. Definitely a Cora type beat. Everything just fits well together. Definitely agree with that. Really nice depth and variation as well. Second, but it makes me laugh. So it was, but I can't even remember what I said second. So it is Cora, or is it Core A? Yeah, it fills up space nicely. There's a synth early on, maybe a little quiet, but the beat thumps. I like so much the sound selection and depth variation for sure. It's pronounced K-Ora. My God, I don't know what's going on now. So yeah, with his beat, I think this is really in line with, I'll call you Red Octane for now. Red Octane's production, just phenomenal job of filling up all the spaces really well. Great amount of depth, great amount of detail. It felt like everything was sort of sitting precisely in the right spots. Great job of the arrangement as well. You had a verse section, you had the hook section with the additional bells came in. Yeah, I think through and through, just a phenomenal beat. I will say, I don't know whether this is just on my end, there was something strange happening in the low end. There's this sort of wavy in and out bass that kept coming in and out. I'm not 100% sure whether that was intentional, but it sounded like you had like some sort of tremolo effect on your bass or something. So that was a bit, I'm getting into the point where I'm nitpicking with Red Octane just because he puts together really good beats, so I need to be a little bit more nitpicky here. And the kick I felt was a bit hollow. It didn't really have that thump that sort of was required in the low end. So I think maybe around the 100, maybe the 90 to 120 frequency area, if you just grab your kick and just play it around with boosting that a tiny bit, it felt like there was a lack of thump. I don't know whether maybe it was that strange bass tone that was drowning it out. I'm not 100% sure. It sort of sounded like, for me, sometimes when I accidentally like pitch my 808 down a little bit too low, like completely in the wrong octave, it sort of has this ridiculous sound where it just fills up space and just has this wobbly feel to it. So I'm not 100% sure. So Swift Dreamer says, I'm listening through headphones, so I didn't hear the bass that closely. It might just be some sort of strange thing on my end, I don't know, but I sort of felt like there was a strange thing going on the low end. So maybe you can take a look with an EQ to see if there's some presence down there that you maybe sort of didn't realize was down there from one of your other instruments or something. But maybe it's just my speakers being stupid. Yeah, it's all one word. I don't know how to spell it out to make sense. I think it's because at first it had the capital A, so that's why I assumed it was Core A. So I still don't know whether it's Core A or Cora. Yeah, the low end was a little bit weird on this one. The kick was super dense and subby, so had to cut it up higher than normal for the bass to fit. Interesting. The kick was super dense and subby. I think there was a pretty sustained sub sound outside of like the 808 though, that was sort of punching through. And maybe that's the reason why the kick itself didn't really cut through, because you chose one that was a little bit more subby towards the lower end, like the 60, 80 hertz. And that didn't have that sort of thump. That was typically around the 120 or 100-ish. The kick almost lasted really long. So yeah, maybe that was the strange kick that was down there. Yeah, I think there was some oddity down there. But overall, like I mentioned, I sort of have to nitpick with your beats. I think you did a phenomenal job of just getting all the difficult pieces together. And I'm listening to the beat. I'm actually really surprised that this was built with just 8 layers. Having said that, before all you guys came, Cora or Corey, whatever your real name is, mentioned that he cheated with this beat and used extra sounds for the transition noises. So he promised all of us that he would do 30 push-ups and beg for all of our forgiveness. Personally, I forgive you, but if some of the people in the chat don't, you know what? I understand that too. You've betrayed all of our confidences, and it's going to take some time to heal from this. So let's jump to Nicked, the homie Nicked's beat right here. All right, Nicked, a minute beat there. I was not expecting it to cut off so quickly. Whoops, wrong thing there. Cora, I guess that could be the way to pronounce it. I still have no idea how the hell to pronounce your name. Nick says he's an enigma, the beatmaker with no name. Pseudo's hurt right now. I feel for you, Pseudo. There are ideas that are clashing, making it hard to hear, says Swift Dreamer. So with this beat, Nicked, initially you had just the sort of drums and the bass, then you had the synth and the bell sound, and so there was this sort of huge gap missing in terms of the frequency at the very beginning, but you did do a good job of bringing in that additional synth layer to sort of fill up that low mid frequency area. I think overall, just like Swift Dreamer mentioned, the big takeaway with this beat for me is that one of the things that I mentioned in the course is that don't feel a need to make every single layer in your beat complex. So with this beat here, the bass line was super complex. The sort of mallet bell sound, that pattern was super complex. The synth also super complex. You just had a lot of different sounds moving all over the place, and it's felt like when you start doing that, it's really easy for certain sounds to feel like they're just doing their own thing. They're not really working, musically speaking, with what every other sound is doing. And I think that's what happened here. So Nick says, gotta be honest, tried a few different things and nothing really spoke to me in the end. Settle on this, but it very much felt like settling. So yeah, I think going forward, maybe the next time around, this is something that's very common, so don't necessarily feel like this is a huge problem. Just be very, very simple with many of your patterns. Maybe choose 1 or 2 sounds that are a little bit more musically or rhythmically dense and have a lot going on. But for everything else, you know, if you have like a 2-bar pattern and there's only like a 4-note progression, don't feel like you're making a mistake and that like, oh, I have to make things a little bit more complex, a little bit more dense. Like, there needs to be variation, just like I mentioned in the course. If you have one pattern that's going to be very complex, it's going to become more and more necessary for your other patterns to be a little bit more simple. So don't be afraid to be simple with the patterns that you make. And I think that's going to be the very first step that I'm hoping that you can take. Just like I mentioned, the next 2 weeks or 2 weeks from now, the next challenge is going to be a beat that's high in rhythm, low in musicality. So I'm hoping that sort of forces you to really do that, because with this beat, a lot of the patterns were just extremely musically complex, almost for the sake of it. So just really forcing yourself to constrict and be a little bit more sort of conservative with some of your patterns. I think that's going to sort of help you understand how to sort of create a balanced beat. It happens, man, Sasudo. I think if you cut a bit and trim, it would work. Yeah, good point from Swift Dreamer. At least you submitted. I think that's the difficult part for a lot of people just to begin with. That's actually plan on doing a video that talks about this. I really don't like the idea of how so many people say, oh, I'm a perfectionist, so I sort of don't want to put music out. I think I've sort of done a rant on this before. I think what a lot of people underestimate is the actual skill that's built when you do put music out, just like Nick did with this one. When you put music out, you're building out an entirely different skill set, which is how to actually put your work out and push through the fear and the anxiety and the sort of feelings of inadequacy or doubt. I think doing that or feeling those emotions and still putting your work out there is such an important and undervalued skill that we don't necessarily endorse or encourage. And that's something that I sort of want to do a little bit more. This idea of perfectionism is just it can get toxic at times. I don't know if that's the word I want to use, but it can get in the way of progress at times. I think I recently watched this video of like knowledge versus productivity. A lot of people want to stay in the knowledge domain and just constantly work and learn more, but it's really important to sort of get in the productivity domain as well and sort of learn how to be someone who actually puts stuff out and actually sort of goes through those emotions and learns how to put music out regardless of whatever negativity they might feel or whatever fear they might feel. And that in itself is a skill. And I think a lot of the people who we look to that are very successful are the people who put their stuff out despite feeling those emotions. So I think starting to learn how to sort of grow that skill is going to be really important. I think, congratulations to all you guys overall for submitting for this challenge, because that in itself is an accomplishment and you're still growing, you're still learning. It might not be the exact skill set of, am I sort of making the perfect type of beat here? You're not going to ever make the perfect type of beat, but you are still learning a very valuable skill here. Jor is in here. How's it going? Red Octane, I need to start lifting weights again. Those 30 push-ups got hard. Oh, you actually did it. Thank you, Red Octane. All is forgiven. Don't worry. I still love you. Olivia asks, what do I mean by patterns? Do you mean musical phrases? So what I mean by pattern is like if you go into FL Studio and it has these sort of piano roll, with beat making in general, it works on loops. So for depends on what you want to sort of do, but every 4 bars typically, or every 2 bars, or every 8 bars, you're going to have the same patterns repeating over and over again. And that's what I mean by the pattern that you build. That sort of core idea that repeats over and over throughout the entire beat. A lot of people want to make every single pattern within that sort of core idea as complex as possible. But in my opinion, what serves a lot of producers much better is if you take some of the different sounds within that sort of core pattern and you make them a little bit more simple. Maybe you choose 1 or 2 sounds or 1 or 2 patterns within the sort of core idea, the core loop, and make those a little bit more complex and just have a variety as opposed to just having every single sound, every single layer within your core idea be as complex as possible. Hopefully that makes sense. Take some protein so your lift paid off. True enough. You have to take that protein within 30 minutes of a workout. I actually don't even know if any of that shit's true. I've completely overhauled my workout regimen lately, and we'll see how that goes. It can be scary to fail or be told your creation isn't good. 100%. but that's going to exist no matter what. The most amazing producers, musicians, artists, there you can find tons and tons of people who are going to say, you know what, that guy sucks. That person doesn't know what they're doing. That's going to exist. Even if you make the most perfect beat, there are always going to be people who don't like it. So, you know, I think just like Pseudo says, mental resilience, that's such a key sort of skill to learn. And I do think it's a skill. It's something that I struggled with at the very beginning, but definitely something that has served me very well. That's the reason why I'm doing YouTube now, just because, you know, there's those voices exist when I'm putting a video out, and I think, you know, these certain people out there are probably going to be really annoyed by this video, but despite that, I put my track out, or I put my YouTube videos out, and as you guys can see, you know, it served me well. So I think it's something that everyone should learn to do. The first step in being good at something is being a beginner at it. And even when you get good at it, it's not everything you do is going to be, every single producer who you probably look up to now makes stinkers every few days or every day even. So don't feel like, you know, anyone can make a stinker at any time. That's true. Like a band, other sounds need to play the supporting role. That's a great analogy. Thank you for that, Swift Dreamer. GG, how's it going? Your beat was reviewed already, so you might want to have to rewind the stream to check it out. We've got 5 beats left. Let's get into it. Deleg, let's see what Deleg's got for us. All right. Perky Way by Deleg. What's about to happen here? Whoa! Quite the ending there. Is my mic on? It is on. I just looked at the stream video and I realized how stupid my crown looks, but you know what? That's all right. Let's put Deleg in yellow here. Loving this already. Glad I didn't end up using that loop. Yours is way better than mine would have been. I like how you used percussion. Use this percussion track. Love the ambience, says Jose. Same. I love this. Love that breathy vocal track. The 808 is just too nasty. Need to have it. This is dope. Minor things I would change. One of those being how frequent the chant plays. I think it's a great POI, but the more it plays, the less I appreciate it. Interesting. I like the effects on the loop that come and go. Nice use of depth and space. This is eerie, love it, spacious yet full. It's one of my premium 808s. Interesting. So, Deleg, I think this is probably... Sorry, just to pick up something off the floor. I think this is probably my favorite beat you've made. This is just a really cool, awesome sounding beat. This the small details, very smartly done. The sort of drone, that sort of pad synth that you use in the back, that ambience, as Jose mentioned, it's just such a smart way to fill up space in a beat, especially one that's at this low of a BPM. It can be very difficult to sort of, and with the restrictions of this beat, it can be difficult to figure out ways to fill up the beat and have every single element play a role. And I think just using that drone throughout the entire beat, just a very, very smart way to make it sound a lot more full. I think that Red Bunny's in here. Also, this time I did not make a beat for the contest. However, I will see the live from the beginning. How's it going, Red Bunny? Good beat. I think I love that vocal sample as well. Just such a smart, unique way to add rhythm and substitute maybe a traditional percussion sound instead of like a side stick, using something a little bit more unique. These are these sort of small details that really help elevate a lot of beats. Just switching out something a little bit more plain for something a little bit more unique, and everything really fit well together. I love the sort of core bells in this beat. If I had to nitpick, there was something that was a little bit strange that jumped out to me. There's a little bit of a fuzz on top of the snare and the vocal. I'm not sure whether you used maybe some type of bit crushing on the master or some sort of distortion that only applies to the higher frequencies. I think maybe just controlling how much fuzz there was might be something that could have... at this point, I'm just really nitpicking. Awesome beat, Deleg. Don't really have anything substantial to really criticize here. Just really, really love this beat idea from front to end. So awesome. Swift Dreamer, his chant comment, like he said, is a bit nitpicky. I just really wanted something I wanted. The beat overall is great. So kudos to Deleg. That was very enjoyable. It was awesome to hear. Let's hear what Soju Moju's got for us. All right, that was Soju Moju's beat. So let's see what the chat. I should move up the camera here. See what the chat is saying here. Super chill. I love it. I feel like the drums don't really fit the beat, says Swift Dreamer. Very quiet on my end overall. Bass also seems to drown out the drums. Sounds muffled on my end. Also, like the beat from earlier, it sounds like the levels could have been turned up. Love the chill vibe though. Could see myself having this on repeat when going for this stroll on the sun. Drums could definitely be processed more, maybe the guitar too. With this beat here, love the sound selection. For me, the kick and the snare are so quiet, very chill. I have this on my study playlist. I think removing a bit of brightness of the guitar would help push the guitar back. So with this beat here, I definitely do think there is a good core idea in here, especially during this section here. Let me see if I can find it. This part here. I really loved what you built melodically in terms of all the different patterns. I think overall there's a lack of high-end presence in this beat. I think just adding some noise layer could have been adequate. I think the drum choice, to the point of Swift Dreamer, I think you mentioned this, a bit off as well. But I do think there was excessive EQing here. Like, it sounds to me like these sounds originally might have had a little bit more frequency presence in the higher end. But you did a lot of EQ constricting here, which, you know, it's definitely something that you want to do for lo-fi, to sort of have most of the sounds sit more towards the lower frequencies. But nonetheless, you still do want something a little bit more on the high end, even if it isn't as present. And I think here, even if you did want to do a lot of EQ cutting, I can't remember which video I sort of added this in, but just adding high-end presence artificially, where you just add bit crushing on top, it'll take those sounds in your beat and just add this sort of nice layer of noise on top. So it's sort of like two birds, one stone. Those sounds end up taking a little bit more room and are a little bit more noticeable, but you also fill up some high-end frequencies, which the beat sort of needs. Great idea though, so close to being perfect. Really enjoyed it overall. Let those chords shine. I love that. Thanks, says Swift Dreamer. So yeah, I think just a little bit less cutting on those frequencies. I do think the guitar wasn't really adding much into the beat, and so if that was one of the problems with the sort of beat challenge of the 8 layers sort of getting in the way, I probably would have just maybe even just removed the guitar pattern, just so I can figure out ways to fill up more of the high-end frequencies in the beat. So I think that was sort of the big culprit, and maybe one of the reasons why you struggled with getting good sounding balance in this beat. Just don't feel as though completely cutting everything above X frequencies is the way to make a lo-fi. You still do need something up there, and even if you do cut a lot of those frequencies, play around with bit crushing. So like what I would try here is add a bit crusher onto those chords and after the EQ, so see what that does, and maybe you'll sort of like the way that feels, and it'll reintroduce presence into your instruments and also fill up space on the high end. So I think that's definitely something that could help this beat out. Whoops. Yeah. Let's see what Pseudo's got for us. Pseudo's been patiently waiting here. right, that was Pseudo's beat there. An electronic beat, according to that tag there. It's going to be a little bit difficult for me to evaluate because, electronic music can mean a lot of things. The bass sounds nice to me, says Necked. Wait, that was the last beat, sorry. I like the droning bass, says Swift Dreamer. This sounds really industrial to me. I like the synth part that comes in around 40 seconds a lot. I personally would have liked for the drums to be more tame to highlight the bass. What I mean by tame is drum sounds shorter in duration, says Swift Dreamer. Good point there. So yeah, like I mentioned, this is going to be a little bit difficult for me to evaluate. This, I'm not sure whether it's meant to be an electronic sounding standalone beat, because to me this really felt like a little bit more of a soundtrack. Like I can see this being in like Terminator 2's soundtrack. I'm going for a Death Grips kind of beat. Gotcha. So I think one of the things that jumped out to me here was there's a bit of an imbalance in frequencies. So overall, you have a very dark sounding beat for most of the beat, just because a lot of frequency presence in the lower end, and the drums themselves also sound like there's a lot of processing on them, and they feel very secondary. They're not very bright either. So if we play this again, 1 second here. My mic was off the entire time. I apologize. I'm a complete idiot. So what I was going to say there was the in this front area right here, the beat was just very dark. It didn't have much presence in the high end. It was just a lot of bass and a lot of processing on the drums. And then once you get to this synth part right here, that's when you have this huge sound that comes in that has a lot of presence in the high end. I think you would have been better served if there was... Yes, I know. Everyone's yelling at me for muting my mic. I'm an idiot, I know. Say what nice Charlie Chaplin vibes. That's funny. So yeah, I think that sort of balance issue was one thing that jumped out to me, and this sort of ties into the second issue, which is the drums. I felt needed to have a little bit more impact. I get what you mean by the Death Grips type of feel. A lot of the times the drums sort of do feel a little bit processed and a little bit in the back, but having some sound in here that's a little bit more in the foreground would have definitely helped. I think the overall processing on the drums just really made them feel a little bit too secondary. So yeah, that snare especially feels like it's way, way in the back, and it feels like because of that, there isn't really a single sound in this beat that feels like it's more up close in the foreground. So maybe having the drums be a little bit more dry could have helped. I'm curious whether you did anything to sort of control the bass as well, because there's this part later on in the beat here. Like, it's pretty interesting that just in this area it was just the bass playing and it's still like peaking at max volume, where the bass is going to do that at times, but I'm wondering whether that was one of the reasons why certain other sounds felt like they were getting drowned out, because the bass was just taking up so much space that it was hard to get anything to feel in the foreground and cut through. So maybe you have some frequencies down in the low end where you can't really hear them, but they're still taking up room. So yeah, I think I get the sort of feel that you're going for with the Death Grips idea. I definitely do think that sound selection for that type of beat and sort of industrial feel was really on point. The bass sounded really awesome, and even the drums, the sort of texturally speaking, they really did make sense with what you're trying to go for. But I do think the sort of how secondary the drums became because of all the processing sort of hurt it. So just having some sound in here, even with Death Grips, you'll hear that a lot of their beats, they'll have these very textured, processed drums that feel really huge, and I think the way you did that was very smart. But also like throw in a regular sort of 808-ish snare just to have a little bit more sounds that are a little bit more upfront and have a little bit more presence. So pseudo, I think that's something that you can sort of keep in mind whenever we play around with different genres, unless you're making like super ambient type of music. Having certain sounds be in the foreground and are a little bit more dry and a little bit more present is going to be a good idea to get your beat to sound complete. Really appreciate the intent though. I really enjoyed listening to Death Grips when I went through my Death Grips phase. That was around the time when I made that soundtrack for that video game. And there's certain songs in that sort of soundtrack that you can probably hear the influence. Anyways, let's see Mixture Mom, what they have for us here. Mac Daddy Max is the beat.
Mr. Mom.
Interesting. That was Mixture Mom's beat there. So it's kind of a tough beat there. So like Swift Dreamer mentioned, I like how the beat is progressing. I wonder, like with this beat, my takeaway was I'm not quite sure what the POI of this beat is. The drums definitely sound like a unique drum rhythm there. From the pack, I sort of felt like once the sounds came in, nothing really stood out to me as like that sounds like a really unique core texture there. The sounds within the beat, outside of the drums, felt a little bit quiet, and it was hard for me to sort of understand what the intent of this beat was, what the core idea was. So Olivia says, great bass, would have loved it to be more present in the mix. Sound staging seems a little off. I don't know about the that ambience for me personally. So yeah, it sort of felt like it was hard to sort of understand what the core sound of this beat was, primarily because, like you mentioned, the staging was a little bit off in terms of how loud every sound was. And yeah, nothing really just jumped out to me as like, that seems like it should be the sort of main focus of this beat. So yeah, I think maybe it was just the core sort of sample selection. The beat kind of sounds like two beats in one. The second idea had the potential as a POI. I like how the beat grew on from the intro. So I definitely know what you mean, Swift Dreamer. There was at one point where it sounded like there was some chopping done to that sort of core sample where it almost sounded like it was like a reversed sample. I think that's when the beat started to pick up a little bit, but that only lasted like I think like 2 or 4 bars. So if that was a sort of core idea, I would have liked for that to be a little bit more present throughout the entire beat, maybe like reducing how long the intro was and then getting to that sound a lot earlier and having that sound be the sort of more routine sound, the sort of core sound that plays throughout the entire beat, or more of the beat at least. I think with the way the beat was sort of arranged, most of the beat was just lacking in that sort of core POI idea. Same with Mixer Mom. They have some really fascinating, interesting, great ideas. So I don't think this is necessarily like a huge constant issue. I think this was just a simple case of, a swing and a miss, in my opinion. That's just my takeaway. I think just having some texture in here, some sound, some pattern, just be a little bit more fascinating and interesting could have really helped elevate this beat. And there were definitely parts of this beat where that sort of started to happen. It just didn't happen enough in the beat overall. Let's go with Jor's beat and then Moha's, and then we'll call it a day, everyone. This beat is very quiet on my end. All right, I'm gonna give this the smooth fade here. All right, so yeah, that's a very quiet beat, very hard for me to hear overall, even when I did crank up my interface, just like you guys mentioned. Swift Dreamer, yeah, the beat needs to be normalized. Same with my interface way up. There's nothing that can blow my speakers. The beat sounds like possible title screen music for an Avatar, the Last Airbender game. Interesting beat, but way too quiet. With this beat, the interesting core idea. I actually really liked a lot of the rhythmic elements in this beat and the sort of Middle Eastern flute sound. That was pretty cool. Gigi says, wee bit quiet. Love the idea that flute is taking away to warm sands. Sounds like it had potential, but it was hard to hear. I think the flute loop made it a bit too repetitive. So yeah, Olivia, I definitely agree there. I scared you. My bad. I should have warned you guys that I was turning my mic back on. What Olivia mentioned, even though that sort of core flute sound was cool at the beginning, it was literally just the same thing over and over again. After a while, it sort of got repetitive. The stab sound that you added yourself, that you sort of tried to use in order to create some variation, I think needed some processing. It's very dry and stock sounding. I think the beat also lacked, I don't think it had a snare in it at all. So even though I did like the rhythmic elements and the textures that were used, it still did lack a very driving feel to it just because there was no snare. So yeah, I think maybe out of tune key those trumpets, says Red Bunny. I think some of the notes, I think there's one that had like a glide to it. And I do think that overall what stuck out to me was just a very dry stock sounding trumpet. So I think that was definitely a bit of a problem. My volume was up to scare the hell out of me. My bad, everyone. So yeah, I think this beat felt overall incomplete with just how quiet it was and the sort of lack of textures, sort of core sounds that were missing, and just how repetitive it was. I'm not sure whether George sort of like ran out of time. I've definitely heard more sort of detailed full ideas from George in the past. So I think, again, just a bit of a swing and a miss here as well. Moha's last but not least. All right. That was Moha's beat Marhab. Let's put you in yellow. Jor is here. My bad on the volume. I need to get it loud enough. That's interesting that that didn't jump out to you on your end. That was pretty quiet. Red Bunny says, wow. Olivia says, nice. Love it. A lot of other sounds I put in there didn't make it through. It's just because of the volume issue. Dope says Swift Dreamer. Love the strings. This is dark, exactly what I like. Maybe lacks some presence in the foreground, and the 808 is too present, says Red Bunny. This is nicely put together. Would love to hear more out of the drums as far as having them cut through the mix. That's definitely two things I agree with you guys on. Love the panning on the pitch down hats. Always a fan of panning stuff like that. I didn't even pick up on that, so that's interesting. The hi-hats that aren't rolls are a tinge too low in volume. Also sounds like some of the trumpet riffs are a bit random, but it's really good otherwise. Tibetan horns I like. This is Dark, the string samples. So yeah, I think overall, I really love the sample choice here, and the sort of core sample loop was really awesome. I'm a big fan of these sort of orchestral, dark beats. I think that was just such an awesome choice there. I would love to hear what the actual sample was for that one, but I do agree with everyone else. I think there's a bit of an imbalance overall where the core sounds in here were the sort of constant string samples, which by themselves take up a lot of room, and then you had that sort of constant 808 just by inherently it being an 808 and the way it was programmed, just constantly taking up room. And I think the drums just really got drowned out because of that. Maybe Moha had some sort of struggle with getting a good balance of, like, once they made the drums a little bit more central, a little bit more loud, everything felt very overwhelming. And so they chose to make the drums a lot more secondary. I do think that hurt the beat though. I think what might have been a better choice that would have led to a little bit more balance, just because, well, like everyone else mentions in the chat, the drums felt very quiet and sort of took away from the beat. I think just reconfiguring and rearranging it so maybe the bass was a little bit more secondary, just having one sort of bass note hit every 2 bars, for example. I think it was it Deleg's beat where he had just like one 808 note at the very beginning, and then he had the sort of core sounds play. I think having that approach with this beat would have been a little bit more balanced, where the 808 pattern didn't take up as much space. Maybe even reconfiguring the sample loop, maybe adding some effects onto it where, like, you had some ducking down in terms of filtering, that could really open up enough space to really introduce more present drums, just because as of right now the drums are very lacking. I mean, I don't think there was much of like an emphasis from that snare. It felt very weak. The hi-hats felt like they didn't set it in the higher frequency presence, and sort of that really hurt the beat as well. So I think the sounds in here were really phenomenal. I think the core idea was really awesome. I think just the execution and making certain sounds a little bit more, a little bit less present, just to open up more room for some of those core sounds, like the drums, could have really helped with the sort of balance of this beat. But yeah, phenomenal job. I really loved this. The sample work there was really awesome. Great sample choice, and the way it was cut up was awesome. So yeah, awesome job to Moha on that, and awesome job to everyone that showed up. Thank you guys, everyone. I hope you had a lot of fun. Please feel free to submit for the next challenge. I think the one we're going to do after this one's going to be a sample challenge, which a lot of you guys love. I'll find a sample for you guys to flip. But yeah, hopefully you guys had fun. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or anything about what the next challenge sort of warrants and what I sort of want to look for in this challenge. But yeah, hopefully you guys have a good Sunday. I'm about to go to the gym, and I'm going to wear this crown to the gym. So I expect that I will be arrested shortly. Anyways, hopefully you guys had fun, and I'll see you guys in 2 weeks.